You might not come across something that says how to sell your brand to Gen Zers. But if you learn about what motivates this generation, how they communicate, what they value, what they're worried about, what makes this generation tick, think about how you take that information and apply it to brand strategy.
Welcome to the Path to Owning It podcast by Provide, hosted by me, Corey Brown, a marketing leader at Provide with over a decade in supporting small businesses. Whether you're an aspiring or established founder, here you'll find tools and advice to start building your legacy and take your business to new heights. To help you achieve your entrepreneurial ambitions, each month we'll tap into our unparalleled network of industry experts who will join us on our quest to provide the answers to your most pressing questions. Like what you hear? Follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you listen. I'm excited to welcome Dr. Corey Seemiller to today's episode. She's a renowned educator, researcher, and speaker specializing in Gen Z. Her insights have been featured in major media outlets, including NPR, The New York Times, and Time Magazine. And she has published numerous works, including the acclaimed books Generation Z Goes to College and Generation Z Leads. As the leader of the global Gen Z study, Dr. Seemiller and her team engaged over 30,000 participants from 81 countries, making it one of the largest studies on this demographic. With over 250,000 views, her TED Talk at TEDx Dayton highlighted how Gen Z aims to impact the world. Currently a professor at Wright State University, Dr. Seemiller recently released her latest book, Generations in the World of Work. Dr. Seemiller, we're obviously very excited to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for being here.
I'm super thrilled to be here today. And I love that we're both named Corey and we both spell it the same way. So I feel like this was just serendipitous, right?
It's meant to be. I mean, I have met very few Corey spelled the same way and can never find the things that are pre-made in a gift shop, you know? So
Exactly, right? You find them without the E. That's how I always get it. But
yeah.
So good to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, we have a lot to talk about, so let's just dive right in. Can you first define who Gen Z is for us, including their age range and the key events or trends that have shaped their outlook compared to previous generations?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I began studying Gen Z back when they were 17 years old. And I actually came across them in doing a little bit of research about who our incoming college students were. And at that point, I came across a birth chart and found that Generation Z, what we were told at the time by this research firm, was born 1995 through 2010. And so they now are in their late 20s, some of them as young as also early in their high school career. So they really do span our teens, young adults, even some that are parents themselves. And so a lot of times people will say, well, you know, the dates are kind of squishy. And it's like, well, not really. We've heard people say 97 to 2012, but really the idea is that most of our like teens and young adults are Gen Z, no matter what metric you use. As far as the key events or trends, I think this is what's so interesting about generational research is we can get a lot of ideas about who people are by the events that happen in society when they're between the ages of 14 and 24. So while we all might experience an event, right? Say, for instance, the pandemic at various ages, the fact that there's a group of people that experience it when they're in their childhood, adolescence, kind of young adulthood, they're normalizing that experience in ways that are really different than the rest of us. And so these events that really shape them carry with them for a long time. As a matter of fact, their lifetimes. We wrote a book called Generation Z, A Century in the Making, looking back at 100 years of this trend with other generations and saying, how is it that 80 and 90-year-old people in the GI generation are still engaged in some behaviors that people might even say is hoarding, right? From the Depression era times. And so these events are really important. So as I share them, I want you to think about not what your experience of where you were when these things happen, but imagining being an adolescent or young adult when they happen. Yeah. And so some of these events are things like the 2008, 2009 recession. I mean, some of the older Gen Zers were little kids then, some weren't even born, but the post-recession of kind of the tightening of the belts, the pandemic certainly, and the shift to kind of the online digital learning that a lot of them had to do in schools, and the slowing down of the job market as people exited college with nowhere to really go. Election and politics has been really an interesting experience for these young people, whether they participate in it or not, but just the impact of the political sphere on them.
Sure.
And then certainly now more so the economy, right? This idea about how difficult it is to get housing or how it's difficult to afford anything. And so these are the factors that are really hitting them when they're the youngest and they're the most impressionable.
Yeah, that's really interesting. As a millennial, I was in my 30s during the pandemic. So thinking of someone who is maybe like 15 or younger going through that is, I'm sure, a very different experience.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
How does that relate to, I guess, their belief system, or what are the core values or beliefs that typically define Gen Z today?
Well, there's some things that have really kind of stood the test of time in terms of at least the research I've done. I started studying this generation in 2014. I've done several studies all the way up until 2023 and continue to look at some of the same factors. And interestingly, or maybe not interestingly, some of the same stuff comes up over and over. And one of these things is their values. They haven't seemed to have changed. Even with things like COVID in the middle of kind of the trajectory of this generation in terms of them growing up, it's only just sort of made things stronger or more so with their values. It hasn't necessarily shifted them so much. So if we want to look at what the major values are, the biggest one is that many of them feel a sense of calling, like they want to make an impact somehow. Even I remember my daughter when she was in 5th grade and they learned all about how straws, are getting in the oceans and sea turtles are eating them and choking on them.
Sure.
Even at 5th grade, she wanted to make some kind of an impact, even if it was small. And so this has really driven this kind of entrepreneurial, innovative generation that wants to solve societal problems by making an impact. And that is a huge value in everything that they do, in the schools that they choose to go to for college, if they choose that, their career trajectories, and how they as consumers buy and purchase products and services. So that's one of the biggest values that they have, is this kind of calling to make a difference or make an impact. But also, many of them feel relatively conflicted because this value is very important to them, that, they want to follow their passions and everything they do. But at the end of the day, some of them just simply need to pay their bills.
Yeah.
So they're torn. Like, I want to go do this to make an impact, but I feel like maybe I can't make that kind of an impact because we're in this economic situation where young people are disproportionately affected by the fact that they don't already have invested wealth or home ownership. So really this big driving force, the big value that's kind of the anchor to them, is this idea of making a positive impact.
Yeah. And how does making a positive impact, how do you see that influencing their purchasing decisions or their loyalty to certain brands? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when we talk about making an impact, they want to be able to make the world a better place. And that feels like a very broad brush of a statement. But it comes down to three main things, which are the concerns that they continue to bring up over and over and over, is that they're concerned about climate justice, social justice, and economic justice. And again, when I say they, I don't mean every single person in Gen Z, but swaths, big, huge chunks of this generation do believe in those things. And so they're concerned about climate and social and economic justice. And so when they're making purchasing decisions, they are looking to companies and they're looking to resellers and even a restaurant that they might go to or a piece of clothing that they put on to see to what extent these brands and these companies support those three ideals: economic and climate and social justice. And so they want to know that it's front and center. They want to know that these companies are going to stand by the ideals that they believe in. And if they do, that really does affect brand loyalty. It really affects where they're shopping. They're much more savvy about what they're buying than my generation was. We didn't even have the internet when I was young. So I wouldn't even known how to look this stuff up. Now they're looking it up. They're getting the information from their friends. They're, for good or bad, getting it off of social media. They know where they should be shopping based on their ideals. And so they really want them to align with those values.
Yeah. And it's interesting you mentioned technology, as the first generation to grow up in a fully digital world. I'm just can imagine the impact or the availability of information is kind of driving some of these sense of calling or impact that they have. But what impact does technology have on Gen Z's shopping habits and interactions with brands on the whole?
Well, I mean, for one, they can get a whole lot more information than I could when I was younger. You can get on and read the web pages of the actual companies themselves. You can get on and see social media. You can read Amazon reviews. You can, certainly get a lot of information. There's also lists of, shop here, not there kinds of things where people are finding out about what to kind of boycott or divest from. And this information is so much more readily accessible through technology than it ever was for younger generations. So that definitely informs where they shop. But the other thing, too, is they can also access shopping online. So they don't have to go anywhere to buy things anymore.
Yeah.
But the question is, people keep saying, are malls dead? And it's like, no, actually, they're not. What's happening is, young people are hanging out at the malls. They're trying on the clothes. They're going to the shoe stores. And then they're going home and they're buying that product online for cheaper sometimes. Or maybe from the same company, but they're buying it online. They're not necessarily buying it in the store. But they like being able to shop in person, even if they don't purchase in person. So that's also really important. The other thing, too, is that they trust their friends and they trust influencers in very profound ways. So if they're considering between two different maybe brands and they maybe post it on social media and then they get feedback on it, they will likely go with that feedback. Even if they look and one product has a great review and one has terrible reviews, they don't know those people. But the people that they do know, their friends who they trust, great. Or the influencers who you're like, well, they don't know them either.
I was going to say who they also don't know, right?
They don't know. But this is the cool thing about influencers. Because some of the best influencers are not just putting up information about something like a brand or a cause or a topic. They're letting people get to know who they are. This is my dog. This is what I'm eating for breakfast. And so what happens is on the other end, the people who are being, quote, influenced by them sort of feel like they know them, like they're friends, even though they're not friends. I don't know about you, but I've had this happen as a podcast host, right? I meet people who listen to the podcast and they know so much about me and they feel like we're friends, but I don't know who they are. They're just a listener,
right?
And not just a listener, they're important, but I don't know anything about them. And so the idea is it's not a reciprocal relationship, but if you're perceiving it on the one end that this influencer is your friend, you're going to trust them just like you would a friend. So really that idea of that kind of trust of the inner circle is really important when they're making purchasing decisions.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I wonder, what do you think it takes for them to feel comfortable enough to make that purchase in a mall or in a store as opposed to collecting all the information, possibly trying it on? Is it just the fact that they might find an online coupon code, or is it more than that, do you think?
It could be any number of things. A lot of times stores don't have as many of the products that they do online. So you might find a shirt you like, but it's not the color you want. You might want 3 of them and they only have 2. Sometimes it's just easier to get it and you can get it delivered for free. Some of that is just a matter of convenience. Some of that's a matter of pay. They might not have like a form of pay that they could use at an actual store, but they could get online and they have a credit card right in the system and they could buy something from that. So some of it's a matter of convenience. And people are still shopping at malls. And if they can find a sale rack where they wouldn't be able to find that like in an online option, they're jumping on that big time. That's where they're getting the in-person purchases from is like the sales stuff.
And you've mentioned communication a little bit as far as like influencers putting out just details about their life, right? To get people to like them, to get to know them, to want to follow them. So I guess my question, and more in general, is how does Gen Z in general prefer to communicate? Are there specific platforms or messaging styles that resonate more with them?
Yeah. I mean, if you're looking just simply at social media, they're on video-based and photo-based platforms more so than heavy text-based platforms. So you're going to find them in places that aren't surprising. TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram. There's a much more a growing population on WhatsApp because it's international. And so as young people are making connections all over the world, they're using WhatsApp to trade photos and videos and communicate. And then Pinterest is growing very much so with this generation. They're liking to pin different ideas that they, shopping ideas, birthday lists, dream room. I want to decorate my room and I'm going to put all these things on my Pinterest and then share it with my friends or family. Those kinds of things are also really important places. So really this idea of photos and videos are really important for communication for them.
Yeah. And back to influencers a little bit, because that's a question we get from different borrowers that we work with as far as marketing. How do I successfully market to different generations? You talked a little bit about how Gen Z's buying behavior is influenced by influencers, but how significant is authenticity in their eyes when engaging with a brand, would you say?
I mean, more than we probably think it is.
Yeah.
One of the things that we've studied for a while with multiple different studies, just around things around social concerns, the Gen Zers are saying things like, if your business makes a mistake, just admit it. If your business handled this improperly, just fix it and do better. Don't try to spin it. Don't try to hide it. Don't try to pretend like it's not there or try to gaslight us and pretend like we didn't see it. They could see through that stuff. They're really savvy in some senses when it comes to being able to interpret this kind of information. And so the authenticity is not just like who we are. Here are our values. We put them on our webpage. We stand up for what we believe in. But it's also being able to just say, we messed up and we're going to fix it. We just learned that one of our supply chains is doing XYZ and that isn't okay with us. So we're sorry that our production is going to be a little bit slower, but we felt it was really important to align with a supply chain that was more in line with our values. So just so you know, like they want that because that makes them feel like the companies themselves trust the consumer enough to tell them the truth. And that is really significant for them because, again, this is a generation that wants to build relationships. They love this idea of like this connection and relationships, and they want relationships with their brands. They don't want to just be a passive purchaser. They want to be an actively engaged consumer.
You know, it's clear that Gen Z values meaningful connections and experiences with brands they support. This leads us to consider what those experiences look like. So what types of brand experiences resonate most with Gen Z consumers? And how can small businesses create memorable interactions that foster lasting loyalty? We'll have answers to this and more with Dr. Seemiller right after this. Are you fresh out of school with big dreams and ambition to achieve them? Or is your current business bursting at the seams and it's time to expand your legacy? If you tend to challenge the status quo and shoot for the moon, Provide's SBA loan may be for you. Our dedicated team of small business experts will work with you to make your ownership dreams, no matter how big, a reality. To get started, visit getprovide.com to see how our tech-enabled small business financing and banking can work for you. Again, that's getprovide.com. for when your aspirations of business ownership exceed traditional limits. I'm Corey Brown, and this is Provide's The Path to Owning It podcast. We're back with Gen Z expert Dr. Corey Seemiller to dive deeper into some examples of how brands can create meaningful interactions that captivate this audience. Dr. Seemiller, in the first half, we talked a lot about how being genuine can foster brand loyalty with this generation. I'm wondering, can you tell us what types of brand experiences or engagements Gen Z consumers generally value most?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and as I had talked about before, which I think is really important, is this is a very values-forward generation. This idea of authenticity, but this idea of making an impact is all really kind of centers around this idea of values, alignment, right? Like I want to align my values with the companies that I support. It's kind of like voting with your dollar. And so one of the, as we think about brand experiences engagement is that they want to be able to have those companies that they are purchasing from be very front facing with their values, whether that means an actual commercial, although they don't watch very many of those anymore, or it could just be pop-up ads, things that they're seeing that really say what the values are. Rather than what it is that they're selling, it's what are the values of the organization with what is being sold, kind of secondary to that. Because they have to feel comfortable with who they're purchasing from before they even look at what it is that they're potentially purchasing and how important that product is to them. So the values are really important and making sure that's front and center. The other things that are also really important is communicating along with those values, the idea of sustainability and environmental consciousness, right?
Yeah.
This idea that these brands not only have values that align, but they're also doing good by people, doing good by the earth and those things. And the last thing, which is kind of unique in terms of what they really like, and this goes along with the desire for authenticity in their brands, but they also want to live a life of authenticity. So they want to be able to have brands that feel customizable, that they feel like they are them, right? Like they fit. They are aligned with what they want. So if they want this really great sweater, maybe it's in 12 different colors, or maybe some of them are V-neck and some of them are not, or maybe you can customize them on the web by adding a button on the sleeve. They want to be able to have things that feel like they represent who they are without having to fit into a mold of like a one size fits all product. So that's also really important to them.
Yeah. Are there, off the top of your head, any brands that do this really well for Gen Z? And can you talk about maybe how they effectively demonstrate their commitment to the causes that they believe in?
There aren't any that I can come off with on the top of my head. But I can tell you that if you do a cursory search and you see what is on the front page of the web page, that'll tell you right away how important that value is. And that's where Gen Zers are going. I will tell you from customizable, though, something that's really kind of an interesting trend to keep in mind is, while I don't know any specific businesses per se that I would highlight as customizable, I will tell you that the desire to go to places like Etsy to buy things is really high because people are often handcrafting. So you can look at something and say, oh, I like that, but can you do that this way, ... and special order it. And so that kind of Etsy model is really, I mean, I know it's not necessarily a high productivity model, meaning if you're producing thousands and thousands of an object, it's hard to do. But that's what they're really looking for. So I would say, again, I don't have specific businesses that I could recommend, but what I can say is what's on the very front page of someone's website, they're not going to click 4 clicks down to find out your commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, or your commitment to the climate, environmental justice. They want to know that it's front and center of your page and you have a commitment. And they also want to know, are there ways to be customizable? So maybe you have one product that's customizable and maybe other things aren't. Highlight that, kind of like the Etsy model.
Yeah. And I'm wondering, I can't imagine that they're initially finding a brand first through their website, right? It's probably through the things you mentioned earlier, like TikTok and some other things like that. So where do you put your messaging on those platforms, and what would that look like to get them excited to come visit and learn more about your product?
Well, I can tell you what it doesn't look like. It doesn't look like someone my age getting on TikTok and trying to sell something. That is for sure. It's connecting with influencers who believe in whatever product or service you're offering and maybe seeing if there's a partnership there. It's also having people in this age range being able to put messages out in language that makes sense to them, to people that will understand it, talking the talk, that kind of thing, and being out on those sites. But ultimately, people do end up clicking to something because once they hear about it on, you can purchase through some of these platforms, but a lot of them you end up just clicking from the platform onto something. So where are you going once you click off of a social media platform and what's on that page? Because they're not going to read much beyond that. So making sure that that information is also up to date. And then when you have anything like a video, a short form video always works best. I mean, we're talking like 15, 20 seconds of a video, very short form, because people aren't going to want to sit and listen to them for 30 seconds, 45 seconds.
Yeah. Just curious, and that's great advice. Thank you for sharing. How do you predict Gen Z will evolve as consumers in the years to come? Can you give us an insight into that?
Oh, goodness, my crystal ball.
Yes.
Well, as they continue to age into adulthood, they are getting more economic power because they're just going to be creating their own forms of revenue and being able to spend it. Questionably, though, depending on where the economy is and how much discretionary income they have might impact what they can spend. So we'll probably have to track them a little bit further than the next 5 years, maybe even the next 10, to see how much money they have. So that's going to be important. And they're a very decently sized block in numbers, meaning that they're going to have a big share of the market when it comes to spending. So that's important. The things to know that where they spend money now might tell us where they're going to spend it in the future.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, we've asked this question. We had really interesting findings where we asked them to respond and say, if you had $100 left over after you paid for all of your living expenses, what would you do with it? And the vast majority of them said they would put it in savings, at least a portion of it. I believe it was $29 of it would immediately go into savings. That was the biggest chunk. So even if they do have some discretionary income, they may be very cautious as to how they spend it. So they want to feel really good about their purchases. They would also spend it on things like non-grocery food related items, like going out to have boba tea with friends or going out and having coffee. So those are more experiences, but they're usually centered around food or a meal or something to that extent. Then they're spending it on things like consumer goods. They're spending it on experiences like concerts. So this is a little bit of a flip from millennials who, what their number one was, they would spend it on experiences, travel, concerts. And so when you start looking at the kinds of companies that are involved in selling those types of things, you're going to be looking at a little bit of a flip. Are Gen Zers going to be going to concerts? Maybe, but probably not as much, because a lot of them say, I can just sit in my room and watch a concert on YouTube and I can see it much closer and I don't have to drive there and pay any money. And so really the idea is, where are they going to be spending the money, and are they going to be spending the money as they continue to get older?
Yeah. Are there any other trends that you would say business owners should watch for as this generation continues to mature?
Well, one thing I'll tell you that doesn't seem to be letting up, and it definitely has been spun around to get very kind of a negative connotation, is this concept of cancel culture, right? It's like you mess up once and you're done in the eyes of many people. And I think one of the things that's really interesting about the idea of cancel culture is there's not a lot of forgiveness to do egregious things as a business anymore. And most of that is because we just know about it now, right? When I was younger, I didn't know about anything that happened. I mean, I remember when the Exxon Valdez spilled all the oil, and we knew that. And that was because it was on the news. But other than that, I didn't know anything that was going on with brands. And so now people know that. They know it fast. It's on social media. It goes viral. And frankly, with so many choices of places to buy things, it's easy to say, okay, I'm not going to buy from you anymore. I'm just going to buy from them. And so I have to say that this concept of cancel culture comes from really one thing. It's not messing up. It's being inauthentic when trying to fix it. That's where cancel culture comes from, is when it's like doubling down and they sort of turn it around and blame the consumer for something. And it's like, wait a minute, what happened? Instead of just saying, we totally messed up. How can we make this right? Gen Z isn't going to jump on and cancel a company that's working really hard to make things right. So as a business owner, I think what's really important is to be transparent with this generation. They want that honesty, transparency, and authenticity. And if you mess up, work with them. Ask them, what do you need? What do you want? We want to fix this. We want to make this right. We want to do this together in partnership with you.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. I'm curious, other than being transparent when, things don't go well, are there other actionable strategies you can share with our audience who want to connect with Gen Z?
Well, I would certainly get to know who they are, right? Learning a little bit more than maybe just your son or daughter that's in the house or their group of friends, although that is very informative, I will tell you.
I bet.
But really kind of getting to know who they are and trusting some of these trends and saying, we really need to explore this. And when I talk about Generation Z and reaching out to them, I always talk about it as an and, not an or. I mean, they're not your only consumers unless that's your main target market. But a lot of times we add things to our repertoire to reach our consumers versus replace things. And so it might mean that you have a very good campaign of marketing that works for some groups of people, but maybe you add social media strategies by, opting to create a Pinterest page. And that's something that you do knowing that you're going to get a target market. So kind of expanding the ideas of how we recruit people rather than replacing them is important. But the only way you can do that is you get to know what Gen Z wants, what they like, what they're interested in. And I mean, the first step is listening to this podcast episode, because that's how you're going to be able to key in on what's important to them.
And opposite of that, what common pitfalls should they avoid when marketing to this generation, besides putting people like us front and center?
Right, exactly. I will not be probably on TikTok anytime soon, at least not marketing this.
Right.
But I think probably the biggest pitfall is assuming loyalty. One of the things that's really interesting is that there's a difference between brand loyalty and product loyalty. Right?
Yeah.
And so the idea is that you get them to buy into your brand, you get them to really believe what you're doing, and then you have a great product, and then you tone down the product over the years and it's not very good. They're not going to stay with you as they see that as part of the brand of kind of letting you down. Moving to cheaper materials, things that just don't hold up as long. They don't have as good of warranties, those kinds of things. So don't assume that you're going to have loyalty just because you had it once, right? You have to keep winning them over by being values forward, by having quality products, by thinking that every time you put something out, pretend like it's the first product you ever put out and that you're starting from scratch and trying to get that consumer for the very first time. Is this the best that you can offer? Because if it isn't, they're going to go look for other brands that have both this idea of values forward branding, but also have quality products. So that's really important to keep in mind.
Yeah. Now, you've shared so many great tips with us today. If our audience listening would like to learn more about how to effectively communicate and attract their Gen Z customers, do you have any resources that can help them?
Yeah, I mean, I would absolutely say to get on my website, CoreySeemiller.com. That's CoreySeemiller.com. I have links to articles and books and podcast episodes and interviews and all sorts of things that can help. And then in those, there's other references to other people who are doing great work. I'm always a big fan of promoting the work of anybody who's trying to advance the understanding of generations. But you can start on my website where I have a collection of really great resources. And one of the things I will say is that keeping in mind that when you're learning about this generation, you might not come across something that says how to sell your brand to Gen Zers. It might not be as explicit as that. But if you learn about what motivates this generation, how they communicate, what they value, what they're worried about, how they make friends, these are all the kinds of things that are going to give you much bigger and broader understanding of what makes this generation tick. And so think about how you take that information and apply it to brand strategy and apply it to getting consumers, kind of ongoing loyal consumers, and how you put out the best products and services that you can for this generation. So kind of think big and kind of narrow it down. And I think you're going to find a lot of great resources.
That's great. Dr. Seemiller, thank you for sharing your expertise with us today. The tips you shared about Gen Z's values, communication styles, preferences will undoubtedly help small business owners engage this generation effectively. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for joining us. The path to owning a business is a nuanced journey. We hope you discovered something in this episode that eases your path to success. If so, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Have a topic you'd like discussed in a future episode? Drop us a line in the comments section or send us a message on social media. If you're ready to take control of your future and start building your legacy, be sure to visit getprovide.com. You can view our resources page for more helpful tools, learn how our all-in-one financial and banking products can help you on your path to business ownership, and pre-qualify for financing in under 2 minutes with no impact on your credit score. The Path to Owning It is brought to you by the team at Provide, with support from Slide 9 Agency. And it's produced by PodCamp Media, branded podcast production for businesses. podcampmedia.com. Producer Dusty Weiss, editor Matt Covarrubias. For Provide, I'm Corey Brown. Thanks for being on the journey with us.
Provide is a division of Fifth Third Bank, National Association. All opinions expressed by the participants are solely their current opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Provide, its affiliates, or Fifth Third Bank. The participants' opinions are based on information they consider reliable, but neither Provide, its affiliates, nor Fifth Third Bank warrant its completeness or accuracy and should not be relied upon as such. This content is for informational purposes and does not constitute the rendering of legal, accounting, tax, or investment advice or other professional services by Provide or any of its affiliates. Please consult with appropriate professionals related to your individual circumstances. All lending is subject to review and approval.